So let me just introduce myself. My name is Julie Turley. I'm a librarian at Queensborough Community College. My colleague Jeffrey Delgado is taking care of our technology today and moderating the chat. If you would like to introduce yourself into chat and in the chat and let us know where you're from and sort of, anything that good that happened to you today would be great. We have a really interesting panel. I'm going to go through and just read off each presenter's name and perhaps that person. We'll do the bio when you present. So our first panelist is Patty McGowan from Borough of Manhattan Community College Library. Her presentation is called Workin' Mom, Sharing My Story. Patty, do you want to introduce yourself, give a short bio, and then go forth?
Yeah, sure. So hi everyone, I'm Patty. I'm the new cataloger and metadata librarian at Borough of Manhattan Community College. And I am a new mother. I'm new to New York City and new to CUNY, and I'm excited for you all to listen to my first conference presentation.
Great, so whenever you're, thank you for the bio and the introduction. Whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. I will share screen. And slides are good to go. Yeah. Okay. Like I said, hi everyone, I'm Patty. Today's presentation is called Working Mom, Sharing My Story. I'm a new mother, new to CUNY and new to New York City. I think a lot of people in this country still view working mothers and working parents as sort of superheroes who can do it all and do it perfectly and effortlessly, but that's just not reality. So that's why I'm here today to share my story. Sorry, I'm getting a unresponsive page. Can you all still see my slides?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. I'll just ignore that. I'm here to share my real story with you and point out how and why our current leave policies in place now are just still inadequate. Some of the topics that I'm about to share are deeply private. So if you see me come off mic momentarily, I'm just, sort of taking a breath and collecting my thoughts. And and this unresponsive still keeps coming up. All right, can you all see my screen now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So before I share my personal story, I want to cover the 5 policies that are in place now for CUNY employees. The first is the Family Medical Leave Act, or FMLA. It's been around for about 30 years. It is a federal law. It offers 12 weeks of unpaid job protected leave. You still have the same health insurance, and you can use this leave to bond with a newborn or newly adopted child. Within the first 12 months, you can care for an ill family member. You can assist military family members who are deployed, or if you yourself are ill and unable to perform the job, this is the type of leave available to you. There's also paid parental leave, which is PPL, a CUNY benefit. It is paid for 8 weeks. Job protection, health insurance, you are on payroll. You can use it to care for a newborn child or newly adopted child. Then there's the New York State law paid family leave, or PFL, which is up to 67% of your average weekly wage. And there's a cap at $1,688.19, which then the benefit comes out to $1,131.08 a week. This is employee contributed, so you have to pay towards this insurance carrier in installments before you're able to take it. It's comes out to 0.455% of your gross wages, and those numbers are from the 2023 year. So every year that may change. It's 12 weeks paid leave up to a certain extent. You have your health insurance, your job protection, you are off payroll because it's provided by an insurance carrier. You can use this leave to bond with a newborn or newly adopted child within the first 12 months, similar to FMLA. You can care for an ill family member. You can assist those who are deployed as well. The last two, special leave for childcare, is unpaid, job protected. It's a CUNY benefit, but you do need your president's approval. And it's 1 semester or 6 months. You can use it to care for a newborn infant. I'm not slacking here. These question marks are, I couldn't find this info myself, or it wasn't provided to me when I was in the process of, figuring out what leave was available to me and what I could take when came time for me to deliver my baby and whatnot. Then the last one is temporary disability. CUNY benefit, you get accrued 20 days a year, maxed out at 160 days. Let's just hide that. Temporary physical or mental, you can use it for temporary physical or mental incapacity, including pregnancy, complications of pregnancy, or childbirth. You can also use up to 3 days a year to care for an ill family member. I'm gonna take a quick quiz here. You can type in the chat or come on the mic. Which one of these do you think I took when it was time for me to have my baby and recover from childbirth? Again, the question is which one of these 5 do you think I took? I'm seeing FMLA, PPL, paid family leave. So it was a trick question. I was ineligible for all of this. And the day I found that out was extremely upsetting. I felt betrayed. And I'm still to this day, months after the fact, still to this day, very, very upset, still angry, right? We call it maternity leave, right? I think I even wrote that in my email, which is ironic because there was no dedicated leave specific to me as the birth parent. I saved up all my annual leave and sick leave, used that, and then went on unpaid, uninsured, off payroll leave, and then returned to work as soon as my doctor cleared me to return to work. So my doctors all said that I'm relatively healthy. My pregnancy was healthy. Labor and delivery was healthy. My baby is healthy, right? Thank God for all of those things, but it was still very difficult. I contracted COVID when I was pregnant, and it was very scary, right? I was thinking that, oh my God, I'm gonna have a miscarriage or a stillborn child. I moved cities, moved jobs for better quality of life for my growing family. There are constant appointments that you have, even as like a healthy woman, a healthy pregnant lady, right? You have up to 4 appointments a month. The move was difficult as well because I had to transfer care. I had to change health insurances. It was just an absolute headache. Weeks and weeks of being on phones with different people, different offices, trying to find a new doctor's office and figure out, insurance lapses and whatnot. My labor and delivery was also healthy, but it did take 25 hours. I was in labor for 25 hours. I did not sleep for the first 3 nights. I, am incredibly honored and humble to have a natural birth and have no serious complications, but it was still excruciating. And honestly, the worst part was the stitches, getting stitches as my newborn baby is on me and we're doing skin to skin. Postpartum, so now that I have baby, I am extremely sleep deprived, right? A baby needs constant around the clock care. And my baby adapts and develops every 1 to 2 weeks. So I'm having to change and adapt with her. I wanted to take a side note and really talk about sleep deficiency, and that, obviously sleep is a basic human need. New parents especially experience a lot of sleep deficiency. I'm not going to go over all of this, but I've experienced, high blood pressure, depression, mood swings, frustration, cranky. I'm anxious all the time. It's very hard for me to judge others' emotions and reactions. I have trouble remembering things, trouble focusing. Yeah, again, I'm not going to lead through all of those, but those are the different sort of physical and mental problems I've been experiencing and will continue to experience for many more months. These are 3 examples of good nights of sleep that I've had in the past several months. I'll go over example 3. That was the most recent. So that was just like Tuesday night, Wednesday morning. Baby was up at 10:30 p.m., woke up, then went back down at 11 p.m., up again at 3:30 in the morning for a feeding, down at 4 a.m., up at 5 a.m. for a feeding, down at 5:30 a.m., and then we're ready for our day at 7:20 in the morning. Diaper changes, feeding, play. I get to eat breakfast. I get to shower. She goes down for her first nap at 9:30. Unfortunately, it's only a 30-minute nap. It's not that glorious 2-hour nap, like a lot of people say. Then 10 a.m. play, diaper change, feeding, play again. Now I get to eat lunch. Then we go on a walk, 12:15 to 1:45. Then she's able to take a longer nap. 1:45, we play, another feeding, another diaper change, more playtime. 4:15, another walk while baby napped, and I'm able to grab dinner. 5 p.m. feeding, play, another diaper change, and more playtime. 7:30 p.m. is our bedtime routine, and then she's down by 8:45 p.m. And then later, last night was up at 11:30 for feeding, up at 3:30 in the morning for a feeding, and then we started our day this morning at 6 a.m. So, sleeping through the night is a thing of the past for me right now. I take, about 3-hour naps. I get a few 3-hour naps in through the night.
Patty, I would just have about 2 minutes.
Oh gosh. Okay. So
Sorry.
it's okay. Had some troubles in the morning or at the start of this. So I'll finish off with this slide. The leave is, obviously inadequate. I was denied my leave. I'm still angry. I'm very grateful for the support my boss has given me. She's allowed for flexible hours. It is amazing. I wouldn't be here in this job if I didn't have that flexibility. But it's still hard. Each day is different. I still feel like I'm falling behind. I'm not myself. I'm missing emails. I'm coming late to meetings. I need deadline extensions. I've missed out on professional opportunities. And I'm also guilty. Like, I feel guilty for being away. It's a lot of mixed feelings. If my baby is crying and screaming for 2.5 hours, someone else has to deal with it while I'm away. And then my baby is upset for that long. I'm not going to go over costs now, but I just want to jump to the last slide, which is, as a wrap up, America needs to do better. We need to work for their working families. If organizations are truly value, their people, they need to act and treat people like people. We need to have a dedicated team or individual in HR to help families only, because the leave benefits are so complicated. There needs to be separate maternity leave for the birth parent, and there's no one size fits all benefit plan for however individuals choose to parent, because there are so many different ways to parent today. And like my boss, managers should plan based on what your employee needs. And is that time? I won't go over everything.
Well, yeah, you can take you can take like 1 more minute, because you had to deal with the introductions.
That's okay. I'll just jump to the last bullet point, which is, individuals, as individuals, we can create awareness, but it really takes all of us, and organizations make it happen. A huge culture shift needs to happen in this country still. And I'm, tired of feeling like, oh, well, if I'm a good mother, then I must be bad at my job. Or if I'm successful at my job, then I must be a bad mother. And being a woman also doesn't mean that I should be the primary caregiver, or that I am the best primary caregiver for my child. There's still this assumption that, women stay at home and men stay in the workplace. And I'm just tired of all of that. So thank you again for listening to my first conference presentation, and happy early Mother's Day to all those moms out there. Thanks.
Patty, thank you so much. That was an extremely important, powerful, and vulnerable story. And we need more of this information to be public facing, especially in professional context. So I really thank you for that. So there are a couple of questions in the chat about, yes, thank you, Jeffrey, for dealing with that. Yes. Okay, so let's move on to our next presenter. That is by Professor Carli Spina from, please correct my pronunciation, of the FIT Library, SUNY, Improving Disability Inclusion Through Professional Development. Carli, can you give us a short bio? Thank you. Patty,
You are muted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, so hi, my name is Carli Spina, and I'm the head of research and instructional services at the FIT Library. And I'm personally very interested in accessibility and disability inclusion, in part because I myself have a disability. So today I'm going to be talking about improving disability inclusion through professional development. This is going to have to be kind of quick because when I did this session at my library as an actual professional development session, it was a full hour. So I'm just going to be giving ideas and highlights that I hope people will be able to take as inspiration to take to their own libraries to offer some professional development for their own teams. So there we go. First, let's start off with some background. There are 1.3 billion people worldwide who have some sort of a disability, according to the World Health Organization. And that translates to about 1 in 5 people globally. And according to the CDC, about 1 in 4 people in the US have a disability. And so that's why it's really important to think about this population wide, but to talk about it in specifically terms of higher ed, which is where most of us work, this translates to 20% of undergraduates, 12% of graduate students approximately, and 4% of faculty. I wasn't able to find the statistics for staff who work in universities, but as we saw from the population-wide statistics, it's a significant piece of our population that has disabilities of all sorts. And for that reason, I think it's really important that we all think about how we conceptualize disability, because this isn't something that people necessarily do consciously always, but there are actually different models that people have sort of studied of how you might think about disability. And I think sometimes people have unconsciously adopted one of these models, or maybe a mix of a few models, but it's important that we think about this and think about what it means for how we offer accessibility and inclusion at our own institutions. So there are 3 models that I'm going to specifically talk about today. The first is the moral model, and it's generally considered an older, outdated understanding of disability. It conceptualizes disability as a result of a moral failing, typically of the individual. And while I think it's not as prominent of a view as it once was, and I think most people would say that that's not the view that they have when they think of a disability nowadays, I think it is still in some ways present in the conscious and unconscious bias held against disabled individuals, especially those with stigmatized disabilities, which can be all sorts of different disabilities. But I think some of that stigma is really coming from the remnants of this moral model, or maybe remnants isn't the right word, but the fact that there is still an unconscious moral model in place sometimes. Then there's the medical model. And this tends to be a dominant view, particularly in the Western world, and particularly when we look back several years historically. It conceptualizes disability as a problem of the individual, and it focuses on medical intervention and aims towards finding a cure for that individual. And so this then means that it focuses on the individual's actions and responsibilities, particularly vis-a-vis interactions with the medical field. And so the way this might look outside of just a medical setting would be things such as doubting somebody who self-diagnoses as having a disability, or judging someone because they aren't doing what a person thinks they should to better take care of their disability. So that would be sort of all the people who offer unsolicited advice, medical advice. It would be judging people for perhaps choosing not to take a particular course of action, perhaps because of its side effects, for examples. And then it would be, the third model is the social model. And this is a newer approach that is prominent among disability advocates, and it's been one that has developed a lot more recently. It conceptualizes disability as a complex set of conditions, including social environments and policies, with less focus on a diagnosis. And it focuses, instead of focusing on the individual, on collective actions, such as making environments inclusive, fostering full involvement of disabled individuals in all aspects of social life and community, and creating policies to support access. And it really looks at equal access as a human rights issue. And looking at this picture here, one way to think of the social model is that someone who has a mobility impairment that prevents them from using stairs, are they disabled because of something about their medical history, or are they disabled by the fact that there are only stairs at this particular subway stop, meaning that if they can't use stairs, they're not able to access it? And the social model would focus on the fact that they are only able to access this subway station in one particular way through stairs, and therefore it's not available to them. And that is what is in this interaction disabling them or preventing them from having full access. It's the absence of accommodations and accessible avenues. So I think that this is a topic that can be really relevant in libraries and in higher ed more generally. And I have presented on this at my library and for other libraries. And I think it's something I would really encourage people to consider presenting on at their library. So I want to talk about some potential topics to cover. And this falls into a bunch of different categories. So we'll start with etiquette, which is introducing appropriate behavior and best practices. Then policies, explanation of how library and campus policies relate to disability and accessibility. Then library specifics, such as accessibility features and known barriers in the library, and campus resources, where else people might find support. So a couple of background things before we even get started on that I think are important to set the ground. The first is it's important to recognize that when we're talking about accessibility and when we're talking about disability, especially in higher ed, this isn't just something that impacts our students, it impacts staff, our colleagues in the library, faculty, everyone. So it's really important to set that groundwork of thinking of it as everyone in the community instead of including colleagues within the library who are included within that possibility of having a disability. And it's also important to recognize and understand how this intersects with people's other identities. So a person who has a disability might also be a part of another marginalized group. And so there's going to be that intersection of these identities that's also relevant in how they interact with the library and with campus more generally. So now let's talk about each of these topics a bit. So in terms of etiquette, there's a lot you could dive into, but if I had to distill it down to some really bullet point what to do and what not to do advice for people, my first thing I would always tell any staff I'm talking to would be ask before providing assistance or wait to be approached, similar to how you might with other patrons. There's often an assumption that people with disabilities aren't going to be as independent or won't want to be as independent, but that's really just not the case. And it's important to allow that independence and not to override what they might want to do for themselves. And then it's important to not avoid eye contact because someone has a disability. So for example, when somebody is seated in a wheelchair, be sure to offer eye contact. But again, not like weirdly aggressive eye contact, obviously, but just making eye contact as you would with any other patron. Verbally identify yourself for people who are blind or low vision so that you are making sense of who you are for them and also making sure that people know that assistance is available. And keep a pen and paper or a device to type on available to better communicate with patrons who are deaf or hard of hearing or to offer to patrons who do not speak. In terms of what not to do, don't grab or touch a person or a person's mobility device unless you've been asked to do so. This is actually something that does come up frequently. So I think sometimes people might think, oh, you don't need to say that. But there's lots of examples of people who use wheelchairs, having somebody run up and start pushing them because they think they're being helpful. It's really important to remind people that that's not something that's appropriate. Don't talk to the person interpreting for or assisting the person rather than talking directly to the individual. That's also very common and definitely not appropriate when interacting with an individual with a disability. Don't shout at someone who's deaf or hard of hearing, or generally, I think just raising our voice to become better understood is rarely as effective as people think, makes it harder to understand generally and can come across as very aggressive. And if you're told confidential information about an individual's disability, don't share that information without permission. Also, I think in this etiquette piece or in an overall discussion of disabilities, it's really important to discuss invisible disabilities. Approximately 10% of people with disabilities have an invisible disability. And people with invisible disabilities face assumptions that they aren't entitled to specialized services or accommodations. And for some people, the visibility of their disability is variable. So perhaps sometimes someone would know that they have a disability, and at other times, maybe they're not using an assistive device, maybe it's only obvious in particular contexts. So it's really important to think about that when you're working with patrons. And it's important to raise awareness that not everyone is visibly disabled, and just a visible glance at somebody should not be a reason to assume that they're not entitled to disability supports. Next, I think it's good to talk about policies and make sure everyone understands what policies apply. So when it comes to library policies, think about not just the policy, but the possibility for exceptions and flexibility. Which library policies require a formal accommodation, for example? When can employees instead offer informal inflexibility? Because for many people with disabilities, an accommodation is difficult or even impossible to come by because it requires medical appointments and a lot of formal steps. Plus, they may not want to say that they have a disability. So when can you instead just be flexible? Who can these questions be escalated to when this distinction is unclear? And who's the contact person for patron questions on accessibility topics? And this is sort of going more in depth about accommodations. I think these are often really misunderstood. And this is important for pretty much everyone in a higher ed setting and in any work environment, really. It's important to understand what an accommodation is. It's a legally offered ability to have some additional support that you might need because of a recognized disability, but it does generally require specific forms to be filed with disability services or HR. And that means seeing doctors and going through a lot of hoops. People might not want to have a formal accommodation because it might be a temporary disability. They may not have access to a doctor for a lot of different reasons. They may just prefer not to disclose their disability. And so it's really important that we not require these too often, but also that we know when they may be required. For example, by law, we're required to have a formal accommodation to scan a full book for someone often because of copyright laws. So many institutions have interpreted it to say that you have to have that formal piece in place. And it's good to know in advance for employees that that's something they can tell a patron. It's also really good to go into details about service animals because this is very misunderstood, I think. Service animals are defined as any dog that is individually trained to do work or perform tasks for the benefit of an individual with a disability. And that's something that is separate from an emotional support animal. So that's a distinction that is often not clear to people. And service animals do have a lot of protections. So under New York law and under the ADA, they must be permitted into all facilities where customers are allowed or the public is invited. And they don't have to have special registration or certification. They don't have to have any particular training, and they don't need to wear an identification. So campuses will often have documentation and policies related to service animals and also emotional support animals. But a lot of times staff might not understand all of this in advance, which can lead to awkward, uncomfortable, and unwelcoming interactions with individuals. Then I think it's important to talk about your library specifics openly and frankly. So talk about accessibility features, where to find and how to use assistive technologies that the library provides, any special accessibility features, especially if they require employee mediation, such as elevators that require key access, specialized services that are available for disabled patrons, such as proxy borrowing, paging of items, or spaces that might be particularly useful to disabled patrons, such as quiet spaces. And then also discuss if you have any circulating assistive technology or other specialized items that might be particularly useful for patrons with disabilities.
Carli, 1 minute.
Okay, and then talk about known barriers. What are the known barriers in the library? How can employees help patrons to navigate these barriers? What's required to be eligible for access to services, et cetera. And then I'm going to jump ahead to campus resources. So it's really important to talk about what relevant policies there are campus-wide, locations for accessible facilities and assistive technologies, information regarding accommodations on campus, and contact information for campus-wide partners. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because I'm also going to say one more thing. Once you've offered this at your library, I think it's really important to talk about expanding beyond your library. So explore whether training is already being offered at your institution and make any suggestions for changes. Partner with other relevant offices, such as your campus's compliance office, disability services, or diversity, equity, and inclusion team to make sure that they're including these topics in their trainings, or that you have new trainings that you work on together. And ask other faculty and staff what questions they might have that you could cover in these trainings. And then finally, it's great to offer opportunities for disabled students to provide feedback on their experience on campus. They may even be willing to present to faculty and staff about what their experiences have been and how they can be improved. So here are some additional resources. I can put a link to my slides in the chat as well. Sorry, I had to sort of rush there at the end, but you'll be able to see all of my slides. And please let me know at the end of the session if you have any questions.
Carli, thank you so much. That was such valuable information, and we appreciate your sharing your slides. I'm sorry that we have to quickly move on to our next presenter. We will have time at the end for questions for all three of our panelists. Our final presenter is Madeline Ruggeiro from Queensborough Community College. Her presentation is on how motivation and increased productivity can lead to burnout. And Madeline, if you want to provide a brief bio before your presentation, that would be appreciated. And you're on mute. You're still muted.
All right, sorry about that. So
Thank you.
unlike Patty, I'm an old mom, which will play into my presentation. CUNY hired me when I was 56 years old as a sub. And then when I was 57 in 2019, they hired me full time, and I am now 61 years old. So that's going to play into my presentation. Just give me a minute here because I'm trying to get to my slides with my notes on it and show you slides without my notes. So just one moment. Presentation. Okay. My son helped me do this. Wait a minute. I'm gonna click on maximize. I had it before and I don't have it now. Well, all right. This came about, I did this as an ACRL talk, ACRL New York talk, and it was an hour long. So I don't have my notes in front of me, but I'll just go through it. So the way this came about was that I had written a book chapter for this book on burnout, and then I retracted my book chapter because they felt that what I was focusing on was not part of the scope of their book, which was I was focusing on. I started with focusing on baby boomers going back into the workforce, and then the pandemic hit, so then I focused on telecommuting, and they wanted me to stick to the baby boomers. But since I had come back to work in 2019, most of my work was being done from home, so I couldn't address that. So that's why I retracted, and I went through several iterations of the title. So when I first submitted it, the proposal was burnout can be a consequence of job satisfaction. And then when I actually wrote the chapter, the first edition, it was how motivation can lead to burnout among academic librarians returning to work full time. Then finally, we were in the pandemic. And so I was reflecting on what was actually happening, which was teleworking during the pandemic, how motivation and increased productivity can lead to burnout among academic librarians working full time. Because in fact, I had increased productivity working during the pandemic. So this perspective of the librarian from the boomer generation re-entering the field, what they're dealing with emerging technologies, evolving roles of the librarian as teachers and administrators, and then you're dealing with demands of tenure. So I worked part-time for over 20 years in the library field. I got my degrees when I was younger in the 80s. I got my master's in art history, and then I got my library degree. So now I'm coming back and it's a whole new world. So when job demands are high, such as work overload and job insecurity, which is what I'm feeling, there is a greater potential for burnout. Job insecurity because of my age, of course, right? Because if I don't make tenure here, who's going to hire me at age 61? So when during the sorry about this. So when I was applying for this proposal, the editors had us read this article about a burnout inventory survey that was taken among academic librarians. And so I was responding to what the authors were saying in this article, and they were talking mostly about age and millennials, and just barely touched on boomers. And then here we have some of the questions that on work that's related to burnout for the CBI survey. So you can see this, I'm not going to go through it. And then there's also another survey that's used. It's the Maslow survey, and it's a multi-dimensional study where they're not just studying burnout, but they're studying other things as well. And this survey you have to pay for, whereas the other one is free. Okay, so burnout is defined. Burnout is defined in the International Classification of Disease as follows. Burnout is a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. It's characterized by three dimensions: feelings of energy depletion, exhaustion, increased mental distance from one's job, reduced professional efficacy. Burnout refers specifically to phenomenon in the occupational context and should not be applied to describe experience in other areas of life. Now, I was feeling a lot of energy, and I was not feeling negative because I really liked the job and I had all this energy, and I was producing a lot. So I was feeling the antithesis of all this, but yet I was still burnt out. Okay. So 3 aspects of burnout: fatigue, withdrawal, lack of efficacy, and motivation, which can lead to engagement, and then over-engagement. And this is the definition for motivation, as you can read. So motivation leads to engagement. Job resources activate a motivational process that increases willingness to dedicate one's efforts and abilities to the work tasks, resulting in increased engagement, which is what I was feeling, especially during the pandemic. I was very productive during the pandemic. Supportive job resources. So you have social support, supervisory coaching, professional development, and autonomy that will lead to motivation and then ultimately engagement. Perceived level of job resources. My role as a librarian, these are my perceived levels. So my role as a librarian is clear and dynamic. I receive recognition and praise for my work, most of the time. Supervisor seems to care about my growth. Development is encouraged. Opinions and concerns are heard. Mission of the college is meaningful. There are opportunities at work to learn and grow. And I think about Patty's case, where I would not have had the energy to do any of this if I still had small children at home. Findings suggest that employees, Findings suggest that employees with too much work engagement may be exposed to a high risk of burnout. And there's resources at the end of the chapter that you can look at the end of this presentation. So let's see. Okay. So this is a chart I came up with in my book chapter, where I put the job resources. If you have autonomy and you get feedback and you have job compatibility, these can lead to these psychological states of vigor or energy, enthusiasm, absorption, which eventually can lead to job commitment, dedication, and high productivity. And these were all the things I was feeling. While burnout can be an outcome of negative work characteristics, it can also develop from positive features such as vigor, passion brought on by motivation, and over-engagement. And let's see, we went over that. Engagement is the positive antithesis to burnout. Over-engagement can lead to burnout. Findings suggest that employees with too much work engagement may be exposed to high risk of burnout. And then here's the sequential dimensions of burnout: high energy, work absorption, high productivity, and then burnout. And then my motivation is driven by emerging technology in libraries, librarians' evolving roles in the workforce, demands of tenure. And so these are two catalogs from Pratt. I went to Pratt in 1986, 87. I graduated in 88, I think. And these are the two catalogs. I kept them, actually. I just took pictures of them. So the catalog shows an old computer. I mean, this was my world in the 1980s, which does not exist in the 21st century. Everything has completely changed. Back then, technology was all the rage. That's where library information was moving towards there. I mean, I think Columbia even lost their accreditation back then because they weren't keeping up with technology. Technostress leads to motivation, a modern disease of adaptation due to an individual's lack of ability to cope with new computer technologies in a healthy manner. That's the definition of technostress. So that fueled my motivation because I felt, I have to learn how to do this. So I put in a lot of time and effort learning how to do, how to work with the technology, because when I was in school, none of this existed. And then there's the evolving roles of librarians as teachers, scholars, and presenters, which is another stressor. The artifacts librarians produce. We produce handouts and presentation papers and PowerPoints and publications, LibGuides and video tutorials. So that adds to the workload as well. And then there's the demand of tenure. So you have to do service to the college and presentations and publications. And then, so mitigating burnout. So people talk about self-care, flexible time, spending time with family and friends, vacations. I mean, this is all great, but I think mitigating burnout, the answer to burnout needs to come on an institutional, at an institutional level. It needs to happen at an institutional level. So teleworking an organizational solution to burnout. And improved job satisfaction leads to highly motivated workers when telecommuting is adopted. Working from home reduces absenteeism and is beneficial for the environment, reducing traffic congestion, fuel consumption, and air pollution. Now, I'm not saying teleworking 100%. I think it's fine the way we have it now, which is we're at 70%. And I think that works fine. So my burnout was from mostly my insecurities about dealing with technology. And then I had to learn how to adapt to the changing roles of librarians. And then there's all this tenure and publishing that comes in. And then there's the idea always in the back of my head of being laid off and not being able to get another job because of my age. So this fuels me to just keep working and working to the point where I get burnt out. I mean, during the pandemic, I wrote a successful grant proposal. I wrote 3 book chapters, and I'll never be that productive again. It's just not possible, not while I'm commuting like this. And then I have a bunch of references here because, after all, this was a book chapter that was never published. So that's that. I would have had more if I had my notes in front of me, but I didn't. So I guess I'm ending early.
Madeline, thank you. That was awesome. I'm very impressed. I could never commence with my presentation without my slides. So thank you for presenting when you had technical difficulties. And again, another a crucial topic in this context, and one that's not talked about enough. So we've had 3 of these, and we are to the question and answer portion of our session. And so much food for thought here. There were questions that were posed earlier in the chat. So feel free to start with any of our presenters, Patty, Carli, or Madeline. So Patty on motherhood, Carli on disabilities, and Madeline on burnout.
I got AJ coming first with a raised hand. Go for it.
Thank you, sir. Jeffrey, and this question goes to Patty. And thank you for the presentation. And I am not working mother, but a working father. And my struggle was a little bit different than yours, more involved, because my daughter was born premature and he spent, close to 3 years in the hospital with tracheostomy, G tube. So as you can see, is more involved for me.
Mhm, mhm,
And I, when I was applying for various leaves,
mhm,
one thing I discovered that many people who handling in the HR, they're not familiar with various rules and regulation
mhm,
and asking from one person to other. And also this CUNY implemented this New York State 60%, 67% very
Mhm.
delayed because they
Mhm.
didn't know how to handle.
mhm,
And so that I faced. And then another thing I also my experience said, first before I was just, due to privacy, I was saying, oh, I'm becoming father. But
Mhm.
once my situation get more struggle,
mhm,
when I started narrating more detail,
mhm,
people became more sympathetic and start going 110% to help.
mhm.
So my question for you, I have one question for you. How many years a month a person could be unpaid at CUNY and is still able to save job? For instance, someone who worked for the police department, I have heard that 4 years unpaid, they can still have their job. But I was not able to get this answer. Thank you. And would you please able to share the your slide, because that has a lot of good information that I was not able to find before.
Yeah, thank you, AJ, for your question. Let me just make sure I have the question correctly. Are you asking if I found any info on how many years, basically a city employee could go on unpaid leave and then return to their
So my
job?
question is like
Mhm.
paid or unpaid, how many
Mhm.
years you could be on CUNY and still able to save your job? For the police department, I think it's 4 years unpaid.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know the answer. I don't know if CUNY has the answer, or if there's someone here or know someone within CUNY who has had extensive, multiple years of leave, whether it's paid or unpaid, and then was able to come back on the job. It's definitely a point for further conversation. One of the stats that I had in there that I wasn't able to go over is like the average break for working mothers is, like in this area in New York City, is 2 years, right? But that's just the average.
Right.
And yeah, it's just babies, small children require lots and lots of constant care. And this, like, our institutions aren't set up to support that in any way. And we're nowhere near that either. The 5 plans that I had laid out are okay, but they're inadequate, because at the most you're getting 12 weeks off. There are other, similarly developed, industrialized countries in this world that are doing much better. Even in our area, I know of a mother who was working for a school in our area, and she got 2 weeks off, or not 2 years. She got 2 years off as a teacher.
I don't want to dominate this conversation. I just want one final point. I just want to say, I think many people in this audience would agree.
Mhm.
I used to read, and I still read, how difficult it is to raise a child.
Mhm.
So many structural
Mhm.
impediment in the United
Mhm.
States,
Mhm.
and why the population is not growing. Now
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah.
That's
And then
all.
yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, but I'll prep my slides to share here in the chat too. Thank you, AJ.
Can I
Thank
just
you
say
so
something?
much. Thank you so much. Really.
I just want to add something. So in 1991, I was working for the Brooklyn Public Library, and I had my first son, and I was given 2 years of unpaid leave. And then when those 2 years were up, I just couldn't leave him and I couldn't go back. So I decided to stay home full time with the rest of my kids.
Any other questions for Carli or Madeline, or anything else about parenting as a professional?
Well, can I say something? Because I'm making an observation here. So Patty is working through all this with a child, and I decided to stay home, but now I have to deal with all this other stuff. So I don't know what the best thing is to do, you know?
Other stuff, tell me what you mean
Well,
by,
I'm dealing with, burnout and not knowing technology and catching up and all that, because it's a completely different world than when I was, in the library, and I went to library school in the 80s, and, I missed out a lot. So now I have younger colleagues that I'm working with, and I'm intimidated because they know so much more than I do, That's what I mean.
yes, yeah, so what is the perfect way to navigate this? There might not be one.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing, Madeline, because that's another stat that I wasn't able to cover is there is no one size that fits all, right? It really has to be individual based, whatever the family needs, whatever the parents needs. And it starts with the managers being people focused, because life happens, allow people to have their needs, and including, right, a gradual return to work for the working parent who has taken off. One of the good sort of like return to work policy that I saw when doing my research for this was a keep in touch day. The manager allowed for their working parents to have a keep in touch day, whether it's like, a few hours out of the week, they want to come in for a working lunch, just to meet with colleagues, do water cooler talk, or come in on meetings, or hop on a project, or, sit at a desk somewhere. Like that was good enough for them to break away. That worked for them, and then it helped them start that return to work and not feel like, okay, I have my family side covered, my child is taken care of, now I have to start a whole new job again, even if it is still the same workplace that you left, or still the same job that you're coming back into. Like 1 to 2 years, 3 years later can be completely different.
So can I just tell you a quick story? So there's a librarian, she's retired now, at Queens College. And I was offered a job at Queens College when I was 27 years old, but I didn't take it because my then boyfriend, who then became my husband, lived in Brooklyn, and I didn't want to commute and all that. And then I got married and had kids and decided to stay home. And then, now here I am at Queens, and that person who took my job back then when I was 27 was still here, and she just retired last year. So, but now I'm just starting my career at my age, and then there's ageism at this age that I feel that, you don't feel when you're younger, but at this age, I feel if I don't get tenure, what am I going to do? No one's going to hire me at 61, So that's what fuels me to keep working and working and working and producing.
We still have a few more minutes if people have any other thoughts or things they want to ask or add. Ageism is such a huge problem in librarianship. Jerry Swadesh put in the chat. And we have a link to Patty's slides now in the chat.
I had one quick question if there's time. I know that Patty is in my department, and I was just curious because some people did get maternity leave. What was their rationale for denying you maternity leave, if you don't mind my asking? Because others got it.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I remember seeing your question when it came up in the chat, and you're right. It's because I was a new employee, which is funny because out of the 5, I wasn't able to find all of, how many months of employment you needed to have under your belt before taking that leave. It's unclear for the special leave for childcare, the president approval one, and then the temporary disability. That's why I felt absolutely betrayed. I was crying in our boss's office when they came back that day and told me, no, there is no leave for you as the birth parent to recover from childbirth. I was like, that's absolutely insane.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to hear
Thank
that.
you. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's good to know and unbelievable. Yeah.
So you have to accrue a certain number of days, I'm imagining, to qualify is what was the problem.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that is a sort of a bad system. I think honestly, people don't really think about what goes, the parents' work, like how much work being a parent actually is, and how it's equally valuable to other forms of work. And our whole country seems to be under that illusion that it's like doing nothing.
Yeah. It's lots of invisible labor, just
Mhm.
just the cognitive load, despite all the physical stuff that I go through on a day-to-day basis, but just the mental load of keeping up with everything too.
And I applaud you, Patty, for doing that, because I would never have been able to do it. So, yeah.
I also, for what Lane was saying, I also appreciated seeing your schedule mapped out about all the labor, the daily labor. I mean, that's so underreported, like nobody sees that ever. It is invisible. And thank you for sharing that. And it's, all three of these presentations are such crucial conversations. And I'm so happy that we were all brought together here to hear them and discuss them. We have a couple minutes left. We can end here. If anybody has any quick last words, we have time for those. AJ, did you have your hand up?
Only comment I had, we CUNY we work at a union protected job, and this is a public university. I could imagine what the people in private sector are going through. So that's the only thing. More prayer needed. That's all. The culture might not change in the United States because this is different. This thing had been talked about a long time, and I don't see much change.
Yeah.
And the way things are. That's all.
I just want to take this time to thank our panelists on, sharing their vulnerable stories and all this information. I think, like Julie says, these are topics that need to be talked about constantly in not just librarianship, but in, corporate world and just in professional works. So thank you all for sharing with us all that information. I'm honored to be here.
Agreed. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Mhm.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you, everyone, for coming and joining this panel this afternoon.